All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I'll be your host for today. For those who might be new to Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants, we're all about bringing science, adventure, exploration, and conservation live into classrooms across North America and beyond. So the school year is just getting started now. We're just starting to get things up and going. But usually every month we're hosting 30, 40, even 50 live events for classrooms to tune into. So the theme of this month, we've had about 15 or 16 or so events lined up around ocean plastics. We've been talking to scientists and explorers, ocean advocates and artists who have been documenting, who've been researching ocean plastic and also looking for solutions to this global issue. So today I'm really excited. We're being joined by Emily Penn. She's an ocean advocate, skipper, and artist. She's organized the largest ever community-led waste cleanup from a tiny Tongan island. She's trawled the Arctic Northwest Passage for plastics. She sailed on a cargo ship around Kiribati. And now Emily is running eXXpedition, so a series of all-female voyages which focus on the relationship between plastics and toxins and female health. So I'm going to bring Emily into the call here. Hey, Emily, how are you doing today?
Hey, great, thank you. All
right. Well, it's awesome to have you joining us. It's so great to steal some of your time from the UK. And, it's always a pleasure to host you because you are doing so much to raise awareness about the issue around ocean plastics. You have your new Shift platform, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little later in the call. It's incredible to watch what you do to raise awareness around this issue.
Great. Well, thank you so much. It's lovely to be here.
All right. Well, if you're ready, I'll let you take over for a little bit, and then we'll have our groups get their questions ready.
Absolutely. So I'm just going to start the slideshow. Hopefully that's all appearing now on your end.
All right. We gotcha.
Okay, fantastic. So I'm here to talk about ocean plastic and the work that I've been doing over the last 12 years, sailing around our planet, exploring this issue. But first, I want to tell you a little bit how this all began, because I actually trained to be an architect, and I very much thought I was going to have a career building buildings. But then I had an opportunity to go and work in Australia. And I wanted to get from England to Australia without taking an aeroplane. So I ended up looking for ways to hitchhike on a boat around the world. And when I started Googling for options of how I could get there, this boat just popped up on my Google search. Now this boat, it's called Earthrace, and it holds the round the world speed record. But the really cool thing about this boat is that it went around the world running on 100% biodiesel. So fuel that has come from all sorts of renewable energy. And I wrote to the skipper who was about to take this boat around the world for a second time and said, how do I get a job on board this amazing boat? And he said, come down and meet us for the weekend and we will see how you get on. And I ended up showing up on this boat, and I didn't go home for another 923 days. So this boat was the beginning of my adventure, and I thought it was going to be just a trip to Australia, but it ended up triggering an entirely new career that I was never expecting to have. And so on the inside, this boat, it doesn't look quite as glamorous as that amazing, sleek, silver exterior might have made you think. And this for me was home for a year. And I shared this with 3 smelly New Zealand boys. And I remember a journalist coming on board the boat, and she climbed downside and she said, don't you get so claustrophobic, feeling like you're in a really tight space down here? But I remember thinking I was taking off around the world on this boat with a completely new group of people. And I actually found myself feeling that it was the most open-minded space I could have imagined. And along the way, we started to see things that I was never expecting to see on this trip around the world. One day I jumped off the bow of our boat to have a wash in the ocean, and I came across a toothbrush just floating by. We would then stop at these small islands and we'd find that the locals were struggling to catch fish because the big fishing vessels had emptied their waters. And they were even struggling to grow food in the ground because rising sea levels had caused their soil to become so salty that their plants wouldn't grow. And then the knock-on effect of all of this was that these islanders were relying on importing packaged food and drink, and it all came wrapped up in this new strange material, plastic. In between these islands, we spent days, weeks, eventually months out in this open blue ocean. And it was here for me that things started to change. And I realized that I no longer wanted to become an architect, but I wanted to work on tackling some of what I've been seeing along this journey. And the thing that jumped out at me most of all was this issue of plastic. Every island that we landed at and every beach I walked on, I found plastic instead of sand. So I went back to a little group of islands in the Pacific called Tonga, and they look like absolute paradise from here. There's an amazing turquoise ocean and white sandy beaches, but down on the ground, it's a really different story. And the local community here, they have nowhere for their waste to go. There's no bins, there's no waste management system, and it just gets thrown on the beach, thrown in the ocean, or burnt. And it was actually that burning smell of plastic, a very distinctive toxic smell. It kept getting at my nose. And when I started to learn about what that smell was, I learned about these chemicals that can mess with the important chemical messages in our bodies. And they're really chemicals that we don't want to have inside us. And the kids growing up on these islands in Tonga definitely don't want them either. And so this became my first mission. I wanted to stop the burning of plastic on these little islands in Tonga. So I got to know the locals and started meeting with the schools and the local government groups, and also started to learn the Tongan language. And I found out that there wasn't actually a word for rubbish or trash in their local language, because the idea of throwing something into a bin, it simply didn't exist. So it wasn't just new systems and buildings and infrastructure that these communities needed, but actually a new way of thinking about plastic, this new material. And so we culminated in an enormous cleanup. We had 3,000 people come and pick up trash, and together we collected 56 tons in just 5 hours. Now, to put it in perspective, that was 3,000 sacks, and it was enough to fill this container ship that took it away, some to go to a safe landfill site where it could get buried in the ground, and some to be recycled. And this amount of waste, it just completely blew me away. I was not expecting to find anything near this much. But it also got me learning more about the issue of plastic floating around in our ocean, because so much of that waste was washing up on these little islands' shores, and it had traveled from miles and miles away. So I started to learn more about the amount of plastic that we all use. And here's some of what I found. So this number here that's moving so quickly before your eyes that you can barely see it move, this is how many plastic bags we are using right now while I'm speaking. And that clock started ticking at the beginning of 2020, so this year. And those bags, they get used once, maybe twice, probably 3 times at best before they're thrown away. But I thought, can't we just recycle all this plastic? Can't we turn it back into new things? But it turns out only 9% of the plastic that we use is actually recycled. And that number is low because plastic is a word we give to hundreds of different materials that have different properties. So some plastic is stretchy, some is clear or coloured, other plastic's hard. And to give it those different properties, it needs to have a different chemical structure. But to recycle plastic, you can only take one type at a time to turn it into something new. So all this waste, it has nowhere to go, and lots of it goes to landfill, but a surprising amount of it escapes and it finds its way down streams, drains and rivers like this one here. And ultimately it runs downhill to the ocean. When it gets to the ocean, it meets these ocean currents that are moving around our planet because our planet is spinning. And in the center of these fast rotating currents, there's a really calm patch, which is shown on this map in the very red patches. And that's where all the plastic ends up accumulating. And it's known as what we call a gyre. And so we wanted to find out more about what was going on in these gyres, where not very many people, especially 10 years ago, had ever been to be able to find out what was going on. So we set sail on an expedition sailing yacht to do the scientific research needed to understand more. First, we headed out into the North Atlantic. We set sail from Brazil. And we went to these coordinates where we were expecting to find this huge pile of plastic. Now, at the end of the first day of pulling the plastic on board the boat, this is what we'd found. And there's everything you could imagine. We found bottle tops and lids and bits of fishing debris. But what surprised us is that we thought we were in the middle of this accumulation zone where 8 million tons of plastic every year are heading. But there was a surprisingly small amount floating on the surface. Now, it turned out that the plastic was there. We just hadn't seen it yet because it was breaking into such small pieces. I've got a little video here that shows you the work we do studying microplastics.
We're in the very middle of the North Pacific Gyre, and when we look out at sea, it looks like a beautiful blue ocean. It's only when we put this trawl through the water with a very fine mesh net do we realise that actually most of what we're looking at right now is covered in these tiny fragments. We deploy the trawl for 30 minutes at a time, and we're taking a tiny slice, just this wide, for a mile, which just makes you wonder really how many are out here in this vast ocean. The samples we're collecting on board are going to be used for a number of things. Some will go back to Hawaii Pacific University to be analysed for the toxic chemicals that are adhering to the surface of the plastic. The rest of the samples are being analysed right here on board Sea Dragon. We're looking at pellet, fragments, film, line and foam. Once we work out what these plastics are, we can better understand where they're coming from and how to stop them getting into the ocean.
And so we bring these samples back on board the boat, and this one is looking at it under a microscope. And one of the things that surprised me here is how difficult it was to tell the difference between plastic and plankton, the fish food that's on the surface of the ocean as well. And these two pieces here are actually plastic. They look almost identical to that plankton. So then we started catching fish, and we found things like this rainbow runner that had 17 fragments of plastic inside its stomach. And this opened all kinds of new questions for us about if it was getting into the fish, which is into the food chain, the same food chain that we are at the top of, then what might this mean also for us? So a few years ago, I decided to actually test my own blood and find out which chemicals that are used in the production of plastic that I might have inside me. And it turned out from these 35 chemicals that are banned because they're toxic, we found traces of 29 of them in my own blood. Now, I thought this was pretty scary, and so set up a new project to try and find out even more about this toxics issue. And I also realized that actually being a woman, these chemicals can have an impact on our children when we're pregnant, and also we can pass them on to our children when we give birth. So I decided to tackle this problem with a team of women, and a project called eXXpedition was born to sail around the world with a team of women to look at these plastic and toxic issues. So I'm going to show you, before we set off from Hawaii a couple of years ago, what it was like when our team got together.
Today we're on the east coast of Oahu and we're looking at what plastic is washing in. Oahu, one of the Hawaiian islands, really sits on the edge of the North Pacific gyre that we're going to be sailing to next week. Plastic on this beach, it literally could have come from anywhere across the Pacific. America, Canada, Asia, a lot of it is single-use plastic, a lot of containers. Right here we've got a toothbrush. We've got a couple of pieces here which are interesting. You'll actually see along here that there are some teeth marks. Today's been brilliant because it's the first day that our eXXpedition North Pacific crew have all come together. The crew is made up from amazing women from all over the world. We have 6 different nationalities, but most importantly, a really diverse skill set. We have got journalists, artists, scientists, teachers, filmmakers, policymakers, and product designers. So people who can both look at the challenge, share that message, and also think about solving it.
So I talked there about the amazing, diverse team that we have, because we really need all sorts of people to solve this plastics issue. But I didn't mention much about sailors. And so we do have a few sailors on board the boat, but right there, we were ready to set off across the North Pacific Ocean. And most of the women on board had never been to sea before on a sailing expedition. So it was certainly challenging to begin with, as we felt the full force of the trade winds that rush across the Pacific coming towards us, and we had to battle the wind and the waves. So I've got a little summary 2 days in, and you can see how all of these girls were getting on.
In the last 48 hours, we've had wind, waves,
rocking and a rolling. The food has been delicious. Eaten a lot, slept a lot, and helmed a lot.
Very wavy conditions last night.
Gusted up to 40 knots in a squall in the middle of the night. Full moon and stars.
I've never been so afraid of drinking water. Not being sick, being sick.
More sick than expected. We're up in the wrong direction and got sick on my forehead. Challenges of trying to cook noodles at a 45-degree angle. I'm trying to use a glue at a 45-degree angle. I think I seen a turtle. I managed to cook some lunch in my underwear. And singing Fleetwood Mac at the top of our lungs. I really enjoy everyone here, and their company makes me kind of a release about that seasickness. It's been wonderful.
And we're almost heading in the right direction for the gyre.
So as you can see, it was a challenging first few days as the team all learned how to live together at a 45-degree angle on board the boat. But they got through it, especially with a lot of laughter along the way. And we came across these huge big bits of debris like this one, which we attached a satellite tracker from NASA so that it could follow it and get picked up by a much bigger boat later on. But the majority of what we found were these tiny fragments, these microplastics. And we now know that there's over 5 trillion fragments of plastic floating on the surface of our ocean. And what we don't know is how many have sunk down into the depths, because we expect a lot of this plastic is going down into the deep as well. And it makes us realize that trying to clean up these tiny bits of plastic that have got everywhere and are sinking is just the most enormous challenge. But we have a great opportunity right now to work here at home on our doorsteps and turning off the tap on plastic pollution, because we realize that actually this plastic, it's about everything that we use here on land. It's that plastic that's in our lives for maybe an hour or a day, that plastic bag, that water bottle, and really it's something that we could do without. And if we can stop using that plastic in the first place, and better still, stop making it, then we can eventually solve this problem of not having any more plastic pollution out there in the ocean. So that's what my team work on here on land, and in particular this new platform that Joe mentioned earlier, where it showcases hundreds of ways that you can all get involved with the plastics issue, and it's called Shift. So I'd love now to hear any questions that you all have, and delve into the topic even further.
All right. Thanks so much, Emily. Thanks for sharing, that story and those great images from around, the world, sailing, where it's taken you. Before we start to meet some of our groups, can you tell us a little bit about, where the idea for eXXpedition came from? It's a huge undertaking. How did you take it from an idea to, these expeditions taking women all over the planet?
Yeah, great question. Part of it came from when I had that blood test, and there was that realization that actually women needed to be a big part of this conversation. And that was the initial driver behind setting up something just for girls. And then we set off across the North Atlantic in 2014, and we had the most amazing expedition and lots of positivity that came off the back of it, that I thought we need to carry this on. And it got bigger and bigger. And I do think sometimes these projects, you don't necessarily wake up one morning and think, oh, I've got the answer. It's all there. I'm going to go out and make this huge project happen, which this expedition around the world is massive. But it's slowly nurtured over about 5 years to where it is today. And we tested things out, and we had a go at an expedition. We discovered it worked, and then we went back again, and we improved the science, and we improved our communications as we went. And it's so true of how these projects come together.
All right, awesome. Well, we're going to start visiting a few of our live groups. I also want to give a shout out to Facebook and YouTube. Feel free to use the chat sidebars on the right to send us in some questions. We'll work a couple of those in. But let's head to Peterborough, Ontario first. We've got some high school students hanging out with us. They're with Mr. Douglas. How are we doing this morning?
Okay, I think, can you hear us?
We gotcha, yeah.
Okay, Jackson. Maybe louder. I was wondering how the project funded.
Oh, I think I caught that. Was that about how the project's funded?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, great question. So it's a little bit of a compilation of lots of different things. So part of it is sponsorship, where we partner with companies who also have an interest in what we do. One of our sponsors is a company called Tomra, and they're a recycling company, and they design the sensors and the robotics for recycling systems. So they're very invested in it. But also a lot of the funds come from the women themselves who join the trip. They all fundraise a portion of the costs that make it all happen. So it's a bit like a massive crowdsourcing effort where lots of people put a bit of money in to make it happen.
All right. Let's grab another live here. So we have Akash joining us. Akash is joining us all the way from India. So I'm going to bring him into the call, let him turn his camera on. There he is. Hey, Akash.
Hey, nice to meet you all. And I want to thank Explorer by the seat of my pants for giving this opportunity. And okay, I'll ask my question. Yeah, my question is, how did your use of plastic changed after an expedition in the oceans, and how it used to be before?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah, great. So yeah, how did my use of plastic change? I think when I first saw that toothbrush 12 years ago floating in the ocean, I think, like many of us back then, had never really even thought about the amount of plastic that we use and this idea of throwing things away every day. It just hadn't occurred to me of where it all goes. And so it made me question everything that I was using. And I mean, my use of plastic just slowly then came down over those following months as I managed to work it out of my life in so many different ways. And I think when you see something firsthand and you actually have that experience of being surrounded by it, it really makes you realize you've got to do something. And it's also, I love how exploring by the seat of your pants allows you to get kind of taken into those moments where it's as good as seeing it firsthand, and hopefully also creates that kind of shift for others in thinking differently about how much plastic we all use.
All right. So I'm going to grab a question here from YouTube. This is Adrian's wondering, do you know what things are like in Tonga now? Have you heard anything about, have there been any bans on plastics, any legislation? Do you know anything about what's going on?
Yeah, great question. So that project I worked on was actually 11 years ago, and it's been a bit sort of up and down really since. Unfortunately, soon after I left, there was a huge cyclone that came through the islands that I was living on, which is unfortunately becoming more and more common in these vulnerable small island communities. And it made it much, much harder to rely on less plastic, because the trees were destroyed, the crops were destroyed. And so actually there was more plastic needed to bring safe drinking water and food in. So I know there's been many, many challenges over the years, but they are making steps for sure. And we're really looking forward to heading to Tonga next year on eXXpedition around the world to be able to get an update, just as you say, on how things are going there now.
We've got some high schoolers hanging out with us in Homestead, Florida. I'm going to bring them into the event. If you guys want to unmute your microphone for us, we'd love to grab a question.
Hello, can you hear?
We gotcha. Yep.
You guys got any questions?
What has been the biggest struggle during your expedition? Is there anything that you would do different?
Was that what's the biggest struggle? Oh.
I can't hear.
I think that's what it was. What's kind of the biggest challenge and what would you do differently?
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, the main challenge with what we do is the logistics of going to sea are pretty enormous. You know, you need a boat that's able to cross an ocean, and there's not that many of those around. And then getting the crew that you need, all of the safety equipment, getting that boat ready and kitted out. The logistics are massive. And so over the years, that's definitely been one of the biggest challenges, and the cost that kind of comes with that on the pure logistics side. But then, you know, in terms of creating an impact on the issue of plastic, I think there's been 3 different layers of where we've gone. And the first one has been getting awareness with individuals. You and I, you know, sat at home thinking about what we're going to get on our next shop to the supermarket, and the awareness of people has been a really, really positive sort of step over the last couple of years. And then the next layer is really industry, getting businesses involved to really be able to do more, so that there are even options for you and I when we go shopping, because sometimes you really want something and you can't buy it without the plastic. And that's where we need to do a lot more work. And there's a real opportunity right now to be able to work more in that space. And then finally, the third sector that we need is government. We need legislation to then enforce some of these rules. And we're really quite a long way off getting to legislation in most countries around the world. So at the moment, we've got an opportunity, I think, with business, and then we'll see the legislation follow.
All right, great question. So I'm going to pull in a question here from Facebook. This is from Andy. Andy's wondering, do you think there's enough emphasis being placed on the impact of plastic pollution and human health? Do you think if we could get it out more, there'd be, you know, people be more engaged and change would happen more quickly? Yeah,
that's an absolutely brilliant question, because, of course, as soon as there is that connection to human health, I think people are much more likely to want to act faster. Legislation will happen, and it'll all happen very quickly. One of the big challenges right now is just connecting those dots. There's not a lot of scientific research to really build the level of knowledge that you need to be able to make concrete sort of assumptions as to what's happening. And so we do need more investment and research on that front. At the moment, there's lots of pieces that we know, but there's not so much kind of connecting the dots. For example, we know that we've got polluting chemicals in the ocean and that plastics are made of things that aren't very good for us. We know that those chemicals are in our bodies, but we don't really know how they're getting there and what those mechanisms are. So there's a lot more research that needs to be done. And I completely agree. I think if that research was there, then we could probably move a lot quicker than we are at the moment.
All right. So a great thought for some of the students who might be tuning in today is this is an area where a lot of research is necessary. So it could be an interesting career path to follow and make a little bit of a difference in what's happening in our oceans. Very cool. All right. I'm going to swing back through our live classrooms one more time. So let's go back to Peterborough. I'll bring you back into the stream. If you guys have another question, we'd love to grab it.
Okay. One moment. Okay. So how would you recommend youth, just as we are, to get involved in sort of this movement towards less pollution in our oceans?
Yeah, really great question. So we have built this website and the URL is www.shift.how. And so I recommend you all have a look at that because it's really good. If you're not sure kind of where to start with all of the options of how you can get involved, the idea behind that website is it helps navigate you to the great place that you can start making a difference. Oh, thanks, Joe. You got it up on the screen there. And so here are really hundreds of different solution cards, and all of these are something that you could do. And I think what's really important to note here is don't get overwhelmed by the hundreds of things that you could do and then don't start doing anything. The idea is pick one thing that you can do and start it and do it. And then when you feel ready, do another thing as well. So definitely go and check that out as your first port of call.
All right. Excellent. So definitely check that out, shift.how, and I'll share the link on the screen in just a moment. Let's grab another question here. So let's see. Okay, well, this falls in nicely with what we just looked at. You obviously have a lot of solutions up on the Shift website. Is there one or two that have you the most excited right now?
Oh, it's such a tricky time right now because some of the things that get me the most excited are kind of getting people together and taking action, whether it's going and doing a beach cleanup or having a session where you really work out what your community needs to be able to bring change. And one of the biggest challenges that we've all faced over the last 6 months is that we haven't been able to do those things where we all get together in person. But some of the other things on the platform that are exciting are some of the material innovations that are going on. There's one on there which is an algae replacement for plastic. And so it's made from seaweed, but it looks and behaves just like plastic. And when you're done with it, you can actually eat it. It's so kind of great and biodegradable. And so that's something that I really can't wait to see more uses of in the future.
All right, awesome. I'm going to bring Akash back into the call. Akash, if you have another question, we're ready for you.
Okay, I'll ask you my question. Yeah, at present, I'm a high school student, and I have to take a biggest decision after this, that what I need to choose. So can you suggest me some tips how to find my passion or career?
Yeah, finding your passion, and I think I remember that time at school when you had to choose your subjects and try and work out what it was that you're going to do next. And I really sympathise because I don't think it's as easy as we often are told, to follow your heart. And I think one of the things I learned along the way is being able to have that time to step away from whether it's my family, my peers, my friends, my teachers, and just work out what it was that I really wanted to do. And finding that space is really important. And I think you can find it in all sorts of ways. It might be going off and doing sport, like I love to go sailing and swimming, or it might be going and playing a musical instrument, or for me, I love to sit down and paint a little sketch of wherever I am. And it's just that really good time when you get to just sort of process and really try and work out who you are. So definitely try and grab those moments. But beyond that, I think when making decisions, I would say it is really important to try and do what you want to do and not what others are maybe telling you to do. Because if you do the thing that you want to do, you will do it brilliantly. And then you'll be good at it and you'll apply yourself to many different things, rather than trying to sort of put yourself in a box that somebody else has created for you. And I think when I work on tackling the plastics issue, I've realized that you actually, if you love the environment, you don't need to necessarily be a scientist, because some of the people I've met who've done more for the environment than anything have been filmmakers or journalists or teachers. And so if you do what you love and you do it really well, then you'll have an impact in whatever it is that you're passionate about later on.
Absolutely. Great advice. Stay curious, right? And Akash has been joining a lot of these events recently, so he's definitely looking to find what passion excites him. So great to see you joining us again today, Akash. And let's join Homestead, Florida, and see if they have another question for us.
You guys have a question?
Guys, unmute and ask your question.
I have a question.
Oops, we just lost them just when the question was coming. Oh, here, they're back. Let me bring them back in.
Go ahead with your question.
So, do you get discouraged when you see certain leaders not taking interest in our environment? And how do you deal with that?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point to raise. And I think it's hard to not feel discouraged when the leaders who we've elected to lead our countries then are not working on the issues that we feel are most pressing. And I think certainly all over the world in the last few months, we've had this other huge topic of coronavirus that has been in the front of our media, and a lot of these other things that we care about, like the environment, have gone on the back burner. And it's really hard to see, because most of all, we know that the problems are still there, and when we come out of the immediate crisis, it's still going to be something that we need to tackle. So it's hard to not be discouraged, but I think the main thing is that we keep on persevering, because there will be times when we will then suddenly have a stadium, and suddenly the leaders will care because maybe new people have been elected or just the times have changed, and we need to be ready for that moment. So I would say, just keep on persevering, surround yourself by other people that care about the same things that you do, and maybe that's virtually surrounding yourself with them at the moment, but it is a really great way to just kind of not feel that really disheartened feeling that you see when you turn on the news, but to get excited with others and just hold out for the fact that there will be a moment when your voice will be heard and things will change, and you need to be ready to take that moment.
Absolutely. And it seems, over the last few years that the awareness has risen quite a bit, whether it's, straw bans that have been implicated in various areas. I think it's on a lot of people's minds. And it's just a matter of getting some of that information out about which plastics are recyclable and how to limit those single uses. But you're right, you can't give up. You got to keep going. And people do listen. Sometimes it just takes a little bit of time. Okay, so another question here. We saw the manta trawler, which samples the surface. What kind of techniques can be used to sample other levels of the water column?
Yeah, great. So we use a couple of different things. Well, down on the seabed, not in the very deep parts, but when we're in coastal areas, we use it's a sort of metal grab that takes a sediment sample and lifts that up to the top. So that's one other thing we use. But for the water column, we use something called a Niskin bottle. And it's a completely cylindrical closed bottle with a lid. And we deploy it down to a certain depth. And then we send down what's called a messenger, and it's like a weight, and it goes down the line. And when it hits the bottom, it fires this contraption, an elastic contraption, and snaps the lid shut. And what that does is it means it's taken a sample right down at depth. It's sealed the sample up down there, and then we haul it back on board the boat, and then we can actually look at what's inside that sample. So those are all water samples rather than the manta trawler, which is taking a net sample. And with the water samples, they then go back to the lab to be analysed because the particles are generally much smaller that you're looking for. And so they can't be seen just with the eye or a microscope when looking on board.
All right. Emily, before we wrap up for today, how can the general public, if they want to follow your adventures, follow eXXpedition's adventures, what are some areas you'd guide them to?
Yeah, so of course our websites and our social media channels, which all can be found eXXpedition, that's eXXpedition, and then my own channels are Emily Penn. If you search for those, you'll come across them and you can follow what's going on. And then of course head over to the Shift platform, because there's some really tangible ways there to get involved. And we will be setting sail again in 2021. So there'll be lots more to follow and look forward to when we get on our way again.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to the day when you're back on the ocean with your cruise. It's always great, too, to steal some of the women who are on board afterwards and share their experiences via this platform. So we always enjoy doing that. So a huge shout out to all of the classrooms who joined us live today, those who will be tuning in later today to the recordings. I'll try to remember after this event to add those links to the websites as well to the description so they're easier to find. And Emily, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for sharing your passion and really kind of, giving a little bit of hope for our ocean and taking so many people to see it and then spread those issues. So thank you so much for joining us today, Emily.
Great. Thank you. And thanks everybody for tuning in.
All right, awesome. For those who are tuning in right now, in 15 minutes, we're going live from the Agui River in Gabon. So with National Geographic explorer Joe Cutler. So join us if you can. It should be a good one. But for now, we're going to sign off. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.